welcome back to my 5th round of this tournament. At this point in the tournament, spoiler alert, if you haven't watched the other games, go watch them before I say this, I have 3 points out of 4, which is a pretty good tournament coming into round 5. In this round, I play a 17-year-old lemon-haired boy who is 21-18, a huge rating. To celebrate German culture, because we are in Germany, throughout this 3 stages of this game, opening, middle game, and end game, we'll be playing 3 German classical songs, each one suited for the tempo of every single phase of the game. So my opponent has the white pieces, I have black, starts with e4. Now I had prepared all morning against e4, going into an Italian. I was super excited to play this, right? And now my opponent just goes bishop c4. That feeling when you've prepped against the wrong opening. Really, really good by my opponent to throw me off course. And now this isn't an Italian, although it could transpose, you know, knight c6 and a knight f3 Italian, right? But typically bishop c4, this move order suggests that white is gonna go with a Vienna game or gambit. So development, knight c3, knight e2, or maybe just f4 after knight c3, things like this, which are, it just makes for completely unbalanced games and not Italian games. So I go knight c6 and then knight c3. Bishop c5, kind of match my opponent here, and then d3. I go with knight f6. Bishop g5, I'm not too scared of. I don't think this would be such a natural move for white to play because I have h6, my king isn't castled yet. So after bishop h4, I could have like things with g5, right, to really kick the bishop. But that's beside the point. My opponent goes for a very prophylactic h3. I mean, my bishop is not even threatening to go here. My knight is not even threatening to go to g4 yet. So I don't really know what this move does, but anyways, I go a6, threatening things with b5, knight a5 to really try to get that bishop pair. My opponent develops with knight e2, very typical of the Vienna, to castle and then accentuate the f4 push. That's the idea of the opening. h6 is what I play because now I don't want the bishop to go to g5 because I'm preparing castling too. So we all have our pre-castle things that we would like to do. Castles, d6, and then knight g3. Knight g3 is an odd place for that knight. I've not seen the white knight at g3 in the opening, in many openings. Number 1 is because the knight takes 2 moves to go to g3. And number 2, the knight on f3 takes 1 move and is already on f3. So how do we play against this knight g3 and why is it there? I spent some time to try to realize this. And I think that the idea is ultimately to go to h5 because the queen kind of takes up that square. It would take off one of my defenders, but at the same time, I'm fine with knight h5. I could swap off the knights, play queen f6, try to trade queens too. I'm not really fazed by this move. So I go with b5 here and go with my plan instead to try to trap this bishop and force the trade of the bishop off the board. So bishop b3, I was expecting bishop d5, slightly more aggressive. I would have surely taken this bishop here, and I was expecting this as well. Takes, knight takes, maybe knight e7, and overall swiping off pieces. My opponent goes bishop b3. Very patient move, but then gives this really aggressive knight d4. We're accelerating towards getting that bishop off the board. The sooner, the greater, right? So now I go bishop e3. I didn't like taking the bishop with the knight here. Okay, if we think of this psychologically, right? I have nice pieces on nice squares here. I do not want to give up my nicely placed knight to take this bishop because after a takes and then these bishops are looking at each other, bishop takes, pawn takes, now I have no pieces in the center and no aggressive pieces, and what is left are kind of dull, lame pieces here. So I didn't want to take off all my juicy pieces off the board. It doesn't make sense. So I go with bishop e6, proposing to trade with my bishop that was previously not developed. My opponent takes it pretty quickly. 2-minute turn here. I play f takes. This is prophylactic. I'm intending to castle short in this game and bring my rook on that open file. Also, I have more pawns in the center, so a push like d5 is more natural, and maybe even e5 with this pawn later on in the game, which is what we observe. My opponent goes with this really good move that I missed. Knight ce2. It's good because it pressures my good pieces in the center, good pieces, right? And threatens to pressure them more with c3. And overall, I'm not comfortable here after c3. So I go with castles. After the opening phase ends with castles, I would attribute this first part of the game by a Felix Mendelssohn, a German composer's song, Song Without Words. After c3, I would have taken queen takes and bishop takes c3. F or queen takes, and I think white has a small edge because they're more likely to push d4 than I am here. So I didn't really like this. But my opponent took. I was really surprised by this takes by the bishop. Now I have a huge conundrum. Do you take with the bishop here or the pawn? What would you have done? I'm really curious. Comment. What would you have done here? If I play bishop takes, I think knight takes would happen because if white leaves my bishop on this diagonal to come back, that bishop is absolutely golden, right? It just has the entire diagonal for itself. I love it. If you trade it off, it looks like just a simple game, right? And I give f4. And after c5, it looks pretty equal. There's no activity here. So instead I do a really controversial move and I take with the pawn. I kind of self-incriminate my bishop, put him in prison, and give f4, which I would have given anyways. But now my bishop prophylactically, really in the future, like I want you to optimistically see this bishop. It's gonna come alive, I hope, later on in the game. And so this is my plan. I go queen e8. The only and the best move, queen e8, to push e5 later on in the game. You don't want to rush this, although it gives you a better pawn structure, more rigid, right? It just gives white the option to go on f5. You're giving that f5 square. So why rush it when you can wait for f5 to happen and then close with e5 and this knight is less active? Also, I kept this bishop on the board because realize that this knight is not so good of a piece. Where is it going from here? Again, the knight is this knight on g3 that I'm clicking on a lot is badly placed, is oddly placed, as we said earlier. And so the knight that's supposed to be on f3 is on g3, doesn't give the square for this knight to go to g3. King h2 is played, and now you can see white's plan. Knight g1, knight f3. It's important to read these because otherwise, why is this king moving so early? Prophylactically, maybe against this bishop, but we don't think so. It's way too early. And so now I go bishop a7. Can you read my plan with the black pieces? Take a few seconds, even pause the video if you want. What is black's intention with an odd bishop move that's already looking like a bad bishop and now going back to a7? My opponent goes queen d2, and now I go c5. That's the intention, to make some queen side counterplay on my opponent because my opponent has king side counterplay against my king. So I'm rushing my pawns to limit their attack. Knight g1, c4 played immediately, and then takes. I don't love takes by white because it lets me take, and now my pawns are looking pretty serious. If you don't take, okay, I can open the c file, but it's still arduous for me to progress this attack, and my pawn is not looking well surrounded after I take. Knight f3 was played, attacking this pawn, and now, and only now, the move queen e8 comes to the realization and comes to the benefit of the black pieces because I can play e5. If queen e8 hadn't been played like 6 moves ago, e5 is not possible here and I would lose a pawn. e5, f takes, d takes, and suddenly I like the black pieces. I don't know about you. I'll flip the board just for objectivity. So objectively, if you look at the white pieces here, do you like more the white pieces or do you like more the black pieces? Let me know as well. I don't know, but I like black's space. But you could argue that my king is weaker and white has more potential for attack on my king. But these pawns are looking pretty tasty, especially from the black perspective. b3 is played here, which drew a question mark to me because it just gives me options. I can go c3 and later on create a pass pawn. I can protect this pawn. I can also do nothing, and if you take, you have double isolated pawns. So b3 is an inaccuracy by white, which now gives black a slight advantage for the first time in this game. Rook c8. I try to defend the pawn. Yes, you can take and I create double isolated pawns and then I attack it, but here it's just more clean if I can take with the rook and then pressure it with this later on. Not now because it gives the pawn with a fork, but with the idea of. So rook c8 is played and now queen e2. White has well placed their pieces, but now is scrambling with their attack. I feel like there's a fumble in the air with these queen moves, these pawn moves, which is ultimately slowing down white's progress against my king, which I think is the direction they should take. Because now I go queen b5, which isn't the best move. Queen e6 gives me a slight advantage for fact, says the engine. It's hard to find this. You're essentially defending this a second time, but after takes, this doesn't work because of knight takes e5. And then if I take, there's queen takes c4, winning the exchange. So here you have to find queen takes, which is interesting. And the idea is that on queen takes, rook takes, if they take the pawn now, I take on c2 with a passed pawn in the endgame. And at this point in the game, my opponent already has sub 20 minutes left. So like 16 minutes left after 22 moves. And 18 moves until bonus time. What are you doing? 16 minutes for 18 moves. I was telling myself during the game, like, does he realize he's in time trouble? I will say, my time management was exceptional this game. When my opponent had 16 minutes and was scrambling on time already after 22 moves, I found myself at 42 minutes. If you break it down, it's 40 moves until the bonus time, right? You have an hour and a half for those 40 moves. At 20 moves in, so half of those 40 moves, you need to have 45 minutes left on your clock or more. Many players go to 30, 20 minutes after the 20 moves, or before the 20 moves, which is crazy. So I play queen b5. Which gives knight f5, and white has some chops here, threatening 2 forks, not 1 but 2, on my pieces. And I have to play extremely accurately here. And I find this really sweet move, d3 first. And no knight e7, no knight d6 works because I'm attacking your queen first. So let's say you play knight d6, I take the queen, you take my queen, kind of a desperado, and then I take your rook, and I'm up a rook, and I'm gonna be up a knight as well. Let's see the other one. If knight e7 check, king f7, attacking the knight and the queen, and after takes, it's a double attack and I'm winning the knight. If you take my rook, I just take the queen and win. So it's a really nice push, and after queen d1, not taking first, now I find the only good move, queen d7. Oh, such a nice move. Defending against both threats and measuring the defense against my pawn. My opponent here has around 3 minutes left on their clock, like serious time pressure for a long time. C takes d, I take with the c pawn, and then knight h4. Knight h4 gives a clear small advantage for the black pieces, minus 1.2. Knight h4 has the simple idea of going to g6, and if I stomp into this blundering move, I calculated knight g6 with some good chops for white. If I take this now looking free knight again, rook takes, I can't take this because of knight e7 check, triple royal fork, winning my queen, etc., etc. So at this point, I'm also taking, I took a 20-minute turn around here, and I'm at 20 minutes. My opponent's at 3 or 2 minutes left. And so my time is starting to scramble as well. King h7 is actually better than taking that free pawn, and is super nice playing against this knight, which only objective was going to g6, and once that is crushed, the knight is dim on the rim, my friends. Queen e1 is played. Black has a clear advantage because now this pawn is not looking to be stopped anytime soon and has become a passed pawn. This middle game truly resembles Ride of the Valkyries by Wagner. My cavalry is going into battle and we're full force into the attack. We are marching through towards my opponent. I just want to point out, we're at round 5. This is the 5th game I've played, right? And all of these games so far are crazy attacking aggressive games. Maybe it's my style, I don't know. What do you think about that? I have no clue. Anyways, best move here is d2. d2, let's look into it. I didn't play this. So queen e2 and then rook f d8, supplying this pawn with some pressure, threatening queen d3, trying to trade those queens off the board and really sinking in that passed pawn, which gives the second rank to me, which gives things opened up here. I didn't play d2. Instead here, I find a way to win a pawn, and I go with g5, a forcing move, and this plan took me some while to find. Knight f3 is forced, and now I can take this pawn, because after queen takes, I take this knight. I realize that after queen takes, I can't take this knight here because of a rifling tactic. If I take this knight on f5, White has the amazing blow, knight takes g5 check. My queen is pinned here. And this discovery prevents my queen from taking this knight and forces me to reply with a pawn or king. Anyways, I'm losing this queen here. I realize this when my opponent takes my knight way too soon and I go, I can't take the knight, can I? This is how my opponent played me. They played queen e1, seeing g5, noticing knight f3, that does not defend this knight anymore, seeing knight takes and queen takes and seeing that that was okay because queen takes, knight takes a g5. Ladies and gentlemen, I was outplayed in calculation. And after queen takes, I took with the rook, which still gives knight takes e5, attacking my queen and attacking this rook here. And after bishop b8, my opponent, with few seconds on the clock, we're at move 30, my opponent has 1 minute on the clock. Like, I'm not joking. For the next 10 moves, my opponent has 1 minute on the clock. Blunders this grotesque advantage with queen takes f5. My opponent slam dunks this game with a simple rook takes f5, keeping the queens on the board. Now, this knight is pinned. That's why I played bishop b8, but that doesn't prevent this threat from coming in. Rook f7 double check with queen h7 mate next move. So I have to play like king g8, and now the king goes out of the pin here, right? And I have like zero counterplay. Bishop takes, rook takes, and this is coming in. I'm down a full rook. Game is over. My opponent plays queen takes, and we trade queens, and now in this endgame, I'm down a rook, but don't underestimate me. I have rook c5, and if you try to defend your knight with your rook up, I have d2. And you can't defend your knight anymore. So my opponent plays rook d1, trying to attack this. Bishop takes e5, king h1. And here, I missed the only move that really narrows down this endgame to maybe a draw for black. And after playing my next move, I realized I missed d2. d2 is like the second chance that the Lord above gives you. The idea is that the king went to h1. King h1 is the only good reply. If g3, I can just sack my bishop with check, discovery check, winning the rook. And if king g1, I can play bishop here and win the rook and win the game, actually. So king h1 was forced. d2, if rook takes, it's checkmate in 2 moves here. I take both rooks. So white would have to find a way to try to attack the pawn, and the second they do, I go bishop c3, and this is minted in. You can't take the pawn unless you sack for the pawn, and that endgame is pretty drawn for the white pieces, for the black pieces if I play super well. But okay, I played rook e5. And after rook f3, d2, my plan is still to find a square for this bishop to defend this, king g1. And lo and behold, I realize I can't play like bishop d6 to defend this, because like king f2, bishop here, and when the king arrives here, a3 will be played. And my bishop suddenly can't find a square to still defend this pawn. If I take the pawn, rook takes, and white loves this exchange. This pawn is what's holding the draw right now. So what do I play? I go h5 with the idea of king f2, h4, king here, and then mint a bishop this way. But now I love this sack. Rook takes, takes, and then rook takes here. And this rook endgame is like a slow-cooked dinner. The pawn endgame is completely losing for black because these pawns create a pass pawn, not like that, like this. Create a pass pawn, attract my king, and then this king gobbles up here. That's the plan of the white pieces, right? And so I saw that too. After king f2, I go, not with that, I go g4, and takes, takes, rook e3. And here, my opponent hits 40 moves right now, and they get 30 minutes plus with a winning endgame, slightly advantageous. Now I find a resource I'm really proud of. My legs are completely numb. I can't feel them. I can't feel my legs. Cannot feel my legs. Oh my goodness. Wow. Anyways, after king e2, I find the only resource, which is bishop f4. I'm so proud of this move because it gives me fighting chances for a draw here. I'm not playing for a win anymore. The obvious thing is that I'm losing this pawn on d2. Ah, the blood is rushing back in. Oh my God, the blood is rushing back into my feet. If you take this pawn, I wouldn't trade and then take because we saw that this endgame is losing, right? But here I have a special move, rook a5. And these pieces are skewered or pinned. It's equal material, so it doesn't really matter. You can't go rook d6 check to get a rook out of there and then save both rooks because of my bishop. You can't play rook e6 check because I go king f5, attack your rook and attack this rook. And both pieces are still attacked. Double attack, I win back material. Here, white has to find this and actually give up the rook, and this gives me fighting chances for a draw. It's not completely drawn, but I have fighting chances. If you go rook d6 check, because I am sacking a pawn with bishop f4, now I go king g5, sacking the pawn, and my counterplay is king h4 to go to g3. And now I'm trying to get this pawn. If you go, let's say, king f2, then I go check, king e2, and I go back to f4. And it's draw-ish. My counterplay here is quite convincing. It will attract a rook, it will attract a king somewhere, and this pawn can gain more influence. My opponent plays this endgame so well, particularly on this move. This move is exquisite, you guys. Respect to my opponent. The amount of patience exhibited to not play any of those two juicy moves is quite crazy to me. He goes rook e8. If you were in my shoes, I think this is logical. We go with the plan we were trying to do anyways, right? King g5 for king h4. I go with a5, saving my pawn, because I think that he's going rook a8. In fact, this is a whole conspiracy because rook g8 check, I have to go to f5 to defend the pawn. If I go to h5, it's mate. Can't blunder that, right? So I go to f5, and now rook f1. Insane move. The threats are as follows. Rook f8 to win my bishop, g3 to win my bishop, and the number of defenses that black has here is minimal at best. If I go out of this pin, right, to get out of the rook f8 and g3, I just give a pawn. Not really tasty. If I go check, just king d1. And after king d1, how do I stop rook f8? You could try with rook e4, but then rook here, king here, and then white just sacks everything on f4, rook takes, and we saw this endgame. This is a draw. Oh, that would have been a good try. I go with rook d4, and bonus time has hit by now, so we both have more time, and I took a lot of time for this move. Rook d4, the idea is that on check, I go king g5, and if you take here, I just do this, right? And if you take here, I just do this as well. Takes and takes. And this gets us to the endgame that we want. Also, wait, rook here, can't I take? And if you trade, this is a draw because king here, a3, king takes, b4, takes, king here. These are the lines I was calculating. It's extremely deep. But I think this draws for black here. On g3, this is what I had prepared. On g3, right? Winning a bishop. My bishop's pinned. My idea is to go rook here. And if you go king d1, again, my bishop's pinned, I'm losing a bishop. Rook d1 was my idea with check. Rook takes, pawn takes with check, king takes, and now bishop takes g3. It's really hard to hold this, but I would try my best, you know? Attracting the king with this pawn, leaving that pawn with my king to try to win these two pawns, and then bishop against rook endgame is a draw. Complicated, very complicated. So instead, after rook d4, my opponent exhibits this level of patience, you guys. Ultimately led to my collapse here after a3. I was like, what? He's preparing for the endgame once we trade off material, and then he goes b4. Essentially, I believe actually, he's threatening rook f8. He's threatening rook f8 with trading everything. Trading everything, and then he goes b4 and he wins that pawn race. Insane move, like super deep. So here I kind of panic, even though a4, but then it just gives b4, and that endgame that we always say, the pawn endgame, he's just first, right? So here I give a pawn, I give my most valuable pawn, and to sway the rook off of my bishop, and I go check, and then I go check again. And my idea is to try to win the g2 pawn, but this is too little too late after rook f8 check. If my king goes here, there's rook d5, and I lose the bishop. And so I have to still defend the bishop, but after rook d5, it's hard to still hold this. King e4 last move of the game, and then rook d8. And my king's in a mating net. I have to actually give this bishop by force, and then this is a mate in 8, says the engine, which is kind of crazy. If this, there's mate here, which is beautiful, forcing my king to e3, and then check, forcing my king to d2, check, oof, king d1 forced, and then a4. I don't know why a4 is played. Oh, my rook is trapped. Wow, and this is a zugzwang, because if my king moves, it's mate. And my pawn can't move. Wow. Anyways, I politely resigned after rook e8 check. This final lapse of the game, this endgame, I would like to suggest a song to pair well with this, which is Handel's Keyboard Suite. Kind of me meeting my fate with these strong instruments, kind of on the dawn of this game. And ultimately, a power of both taking over the other power. That's how I see this song. I will say 5 crazy games out of 5 so far. Crazy tournament. And yeah, see you in game 6.